The sound of unfamiliar laughter drifted through my grandmother's Victorian windows as I climbed the front steps, my arms full of groceries for the dinner party. Marcus had insisted we host. I fumbled with my keys, wondering who could possibly be visiting on a Thursday afternoon when my husband should have been at his architectural firm downtown. The laughter grew louder as I pushed open the heavy oak door, and what I discovered in my own living room would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. There, sprawled across the antique sofa my grandmother had left me, was a young woman with cascading auburn hair and a pronounced belly straining against a fitted sundress. Her hand rested protectively over what was unmistakably a pregnancy bump, while she giggled at something Marcus was saying from his position on the matching armchair. They both looked up as I entered, and the expression on my husband's face told me everything I needed to know before a single word was spoken. Marcus cleared his throat and stood up with the casual confidence of a man who had rehearsed this moment, though clearly not well enough. The woman remained seated, her green eyes meeting mine with a mixture of defiance and curiosity that made my stomach lurch. 3 years of marriage, 7 years together total. And this was how I would learn that my life had been built on lies. My name is Natalie Brooks, and until that Thursday afternoon in late September, I believed I was living the life I'd always dreamed of. At 32, I had what most people would consider success, a beautiful Victorian home in Portland's Laurelhurst neighborhood that I'd inherited from my grandmother, a thriving marketing career at a prestigious firm downtown, and a husband who seemed to adore me. Marcus Brooks, 35 and devastatingly handsome in that polished, professional way that photographs well at corporate events, had swept me off my feet during a gallery opening 7 years earlier. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic dinners, weekend getaways to wine country, and late-night conversations about our shared dreams of renovation projects and future children. Marcus, an architect with his own growing firm, appreciated the historic character of my grandmother's house, and had grand plans for modernizing it while preserving its Victorian charm. I thought we were building something beautiful together, both literally and figuratively. The warning signs had been subtle at first, so easy to rationalize away when you're deeply in love and committed to making a marriage work. Marcus had always been naturally flirtatious, charming clients and colleagues with equal. His late nights at the office had increased over the past year, but his firm was expanding, taking on larger commercial projects that demanded more attention. When he started spending weekends at construction sites or client meetings, I told myself it was temporary, the price of success that would pay dividends for our future together. Even his growing irritation with my own career should have raised red flags. Marcus had initially been supportive when I'd expressed interest in returning to my artistic roots, the pottery and ceramics work I'd abandoned after college in favor of a more stable marketing career. But as my hobby grew more serious, taking up evenings and weekend time in the basement studio I'd created, his enthusiasm waned. He complained about the clay dust, the kiln's energy costs, the time I spent away from our social obligations. Gradually, I found myself sneaking down to the studio after he'd gone to bed, apologizing for my passion as if it were an indulgence rather than a calling. The woman sitting in my living room introduced herself as Vanessa Taylor, 26 years old and, according to the subsequent conversation, 5 months pregnant with my husband's child. She worked as a project coordinator at Marcus's firm, a detail that made my stomach twist with the realization that this betrayal had been happening under the professional guise of late nights and weekend work sessions. Her confidence in my home, the way she casually reached for the ceramic mug I'd made last spring, suggested this wasn't her first visit to what I'd considered our private sanctuary. Marcus attempted to control the narrative from the beginning, his voice taking on the measured tone he used when presenting to difficult clients. This was an unfortunate situation, he explained, but not entirely unexpected given the problems in our marriage. Vanessa was carrying his child, a responsibility he couldn't ignore, and he believed the mature thing to do was to bring everyone together to discuss a civilized transition. The word transition hit me like cold water. He had already decided our marriage was over, and had apparently been planning this moment for weeks, if not months. Vanessa's presence in my home wasn't just about introducing me to my husband's mistress and their unborn child. As Marcus continued his carefully rehearsed speech, it became clear that she had moved in. Her suitcases were stacked in the hallway, her toiletries had already claimed space in our master bathroom, and she spoke about nursery plans for the guest room with the casual authority of someone who had every right to make such decisions. My grandmother's house, the place where I'd felt most connected to my family history and personal identity, had been invaded and claimed while I was at work earning money to pay the mortgage. The financial implications became clear as Marcus outlined his expectations. The house was in my name, inherited free and clear, but he had contributed to renovations and maintenance over our 3 years of marriage. He felt entitled to continue living there during Vanessa's pregnancy and after the baby's birth, particularly since his name was on the utility accounts and he'd been contributing to household expenses. The alternative, he suggested with barely concealed threat, would be a lengthy legal battle over marital assets that could force the sale of the house anyway. Vanessa remained largely silent during this initial confrontation, her hand never leaving her belly as she observed my reactions with keen interest. When she did speak, it was with the calculated sweetness of someone who had practiced empathy without feeling it. She understood how difficult this must be for me, she said, but surely I could see that a baby changed everything. Children needed stability, financial security, and a peaceful environment. She hoped we could all be mature about the situation and find a way to coexist that would be best for everyone involved, especially the innocent child who hadn't asked to be born into such complicated circumstances. The manipulation was breathtaking in its audacity. Marcus and Vanessa had transformed his infidelity and betrayal into a noble sacrifice for the sake of an unborn child, while casting me as the potential villain who might stand in the way of proper family formation. They spoke about shared custody arrangements for the house as if it were a reasonable compromise rather than an insane demand that the betrayed wife accommodate her husband's pregnant mistress in her own inherited home. As the initial shock began to wear off, rage and disbelief battled for dominance in my chest. The groceries I'd bought for our dinner party lay scattered across the kitchen counter where I'd dropped them, ingredients for the elaborate meal I'd planned to impress Marcus's newest client. The irony wasn't lost on me that I'd been preparing to help advance his career while he was busy destroying our marriage and claiming my family home for his new life. Marcus seemed to interpret my silence as acceptance or at least resignation. He began discussing practical matters with the brisk efficiency he brought to his professional projects. Vanessa would need the master bedroom because of her condition, but I was welcome to stay in the guest room until I found more suitable long-term arrangements. They'd be happy to give me time to process this change, perhaps a month or two to make alternative living arrangements that worked for everyone. His casual assumption that I would meekly accept displacement from my own bedroom in my own house revealed just how completely he had underestimated both my character and my legal position. The conversation continued for another excruciating hour, with Marcus outlining his vision for this bizarre domestic arrangement, while Vanessa occasionally chimed in with helpful suggestions about household schedules and shared responsibility. They had clearly discussed this scenario extensively, planning for every possible reaction except the one that was actually forming in my mind. As they talked, I found myself studying them both with growing clarity, seeing not just the immediate betrayal but the pattern of manipulation and control that had led to this moment. Marcus had always been skilled at reframing situations to his advantage, making his desires seem like logical necessities and his partner's resistance appear unreasonable. Over the years of our relationship, I'd gradually learned to anticipate his moods, adjust my behavior to avoid conflict and prioritize his comfort over my own preferences. The pottery studio I'd hidden in the basement was just one example of how I'd learned to pursue my own interests only in the spaces he didn't value or note. Vanessa, despite her youth, demonstrated a similar talent for emotional manipulation, couching her demands in language of mutual concern and shared responsibility. Her pregnancy was both shield and weapon, protection against criticism and justification for unprecedented demands on my hospitality and home. The way she casually explored my kitchen, commenting on the potential for baby-proofing various cabinets, suggested she had already begun to see herself as the rightful mistress of the household. As evening approached and the reality of my situation fully sank in, I excused myself to the basement studio, claiming I needed time to process what they'd told me. Marcus seemed relieved by my apparent compliance, probably congratulating himself on how smoothly his carefully planned revelation had proceeded. Vanessa smiled sympathetically, and suggested we could all have a nice dinner together once I'd had a chance to adjust to the new reality. Down in my studio, surrounded by the pottery wheels and half-finished pieces that represented my truest self, I began to understand that this crisis was also an opportunity. Marcus and Vanessa had overplayed their hand, making demands so outrageous that even the most conflict-averse person would be forced to fight back. They had underestimated both my legal rights and my capacity for strategic thinking, assumptions that would prove to be costly mistakes. The basement studio had been my refuge during the difficult periods of our marriage, the place where I could create something beautiful with my own hands and remember who I was beyond the role of supportive wife. Now it would become my war room, the place where I would plan my counterattack against two people who had mistaken my kindness for weakness and my love for stupidity. As I sat among my pottery tools and unfired clay, I began to formulate a response that would show them exactly what kind of woman they had chosen to betray and underestimate. The sound of their laughter drifted down through the old house's wooden floors as they settled in for what they believed would be their first peaceful evening in their new domestic arrangement. They had no idea that upstairs in the guest room where Marcus expected me to relocate, I would spend the night making phone calls and researching legal options that would turn their comfortable assumptions upside down. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of their education in the difference between seizing something and actually owning it, a lesson that would prove far more expensive than they could possibly imagine. Sleep eluded me that first night as the reality of my situation crystallized with brutal clarity. Through the thin walls of my grandmother's Victorian house, I could hear Marcus and Vanessa settling into what had been our master bedroom, their quiet conversations punctuated by the occasional laugh that sent fresh waves of humiliation through my chest. The guest room felt foreign and cramped, nothing like the sanctuary I'd shared with my husband for 3 years. Every familiar creak of the old floorboards above reminded me that strangers were now occupying the most intimate space in my inherited home. By dawn I had reached several uncomfortable conclusions about my circumstances. First, Marcus had been planning this confrontation for months, probably since learning about Vanessa's pregnancy. His casual mention of their need for nursery space, and his detailed knowledge of tenancy rights, suggested extensive preparation. Second, my financial situation was more precarious than I'd realized. While the house was mine free and clear, Marcus controlled most of our liquid assets, through joint accounts he'd insisted would simplify our finances. Third, and most disturbing, I had somehow become so isolated from my support network that I couldn't immediately think of anyone to call for help. The isolation hadn't happened overnight. Over the 7 years with Marcus, my friendships had gradually withered as his social demands took precedence over my personal relationships. College friends had drifted away after I'd canceled too many plans to attend Marcus's work function. My sister Claire, 2 years younger and living in San Francisco, had grown distant after several tense dinners where Marcus had dominated conversations and dismissed her concerns about his treatment of me. Even my pottery instructor from the community college, who had encouraged my artistic development, had been relegated to brief interactions when Marcus complained about the expense and time commitment. Marcus emerged from our former bedroom that Friday morning, looking refreshed and confident, greeting me in the kitchen, as if nothing had fundamentally changed between us. He poured coffee from the expensive machine he'd insisted we buy, commenting on his busy day ahead at the firm, and asking if I'd given thought to our discussion from the previous evening. His casual assumption that I would quietly accept our new living arrangement revealed just how thoroughly he had misjudged both my character and my legal position. Vanessa appeared shortly after, moving through my kitchen with the proprietary comfort of someone who had already claimed ownership. She wore one of my silk robes, her pregnancy making the fabric strain across her belly, and helped herself to fruit from the bowl I kept on the counter. Her bright morning chatter about nursery colors and baby names felt like fingernails on a chalkboard, each word a reminder that my home had been invaded by people who felt entitled to rebuild my life around their convenience. The morning escalated when Vanessa began discussing practical arrangements for our shared living situation. She needed the larger closet in the master bedroom for her expanding wardrobe, she explained, and suggested I might want to store my evening gowns and professional clothes elsewhere since she assumed I'd be downsizing my lifestyle anyway. The master bathroom would require modifications for safety during her pregnancy, including a shower chair, and grab bars that Marcus would be happy to install. Most incredibly, she wondered if I might consider preparing meals, since cooking smells made her nauseous, and she'd heard I was quite skilled in the kitchen. Marcus nodded along with these suggestions as if they were reasonable requests, rather than breathtaking displays of entitlement. When I remained silent, he interpreted my restraint as agreement, discussing timeline for these modifications, and wondering aloud about the logistics of converting my basement studio into additional storage space for baby equipment. The casual way they dismantled my personal spaces and routines while I stood holding a coffee mug revealed the depth of their disrespect for both my rights and my dignity. The breaking point came when Vanessa mentioned expecting guests for the weekend. Her mother was driving up from Sacramento to help with pregnancy planning, and they'd need the guest room I was currently occupying. Perhaps I could stay with friends for a few days, she suggested sweetly, giving them space to properly prepare for the baby's arrival. The assumption that I would vacate my own house to accommodate the mother of my husband's mistress finally shattered my shocked paralysis. I set down my coffee mug with deliberate precision and looked directly at both of them for the first time since their revelation. The time for politeness and shock had ended, replaced by a cold clarity that surprised even me. Without a word, I walked to the landline phone mounted on the kitchen wall and dialed the number for David Chen, the attorney who had handled my grandmother's estate transfer. The conversation was brief and professional, requesting an emergency consultation about property rights and marital law, but loud enough for Marcus and Vanessa to understand that their comfortable assumptions were about to be challenged. Marcus's expression shifted from casual confidence to genuine concern as I ended the call. Vanessa looked confused, clearly having expected continued compliance from the woman whose life she was systematically dismantling. They had made the classic mistake of believing that kindness equaled weakness, that my initial shock indicated permanent submission to their outrageous demands. The legal consultation that afternoon proved illuminating in ways that both bolstered my confidence and complicated my situation. David Chen, a sharp-eyed man in his 50s, who had known my grandmother professionally, outlined my rights with brutal honesty. The house was entirely mine, inherited outside the bounds of marital property, giving me absolute authority over who could and couldn't live there. However, Oregon's domestic relations laws meant that Marcus could potentially claim some interest in improvements made during our marriage, though proving his investments versus mine would require extensive documentation. More significantly, David explained that evicting a pregnant woman required careful legal maneuvering to avoid potential discrimination claims, even when that woman had no legal right to occupancy. Vanessa's condition provided her with certain protections under state housing laws, meaning I couldn't simply change the locks and leave her belongings on the sidewalk, much as I might want to pursue that satisfying option. The financial picture was equally complex. While Marcus couldn't claim ownership of the house itself, our joint accounts and shared credit cards created entanglements that would require formal legal separation to resolve. My marketing salary was substantial enough to maintain the house independently, but Marcus's access to our savings and his ability to rack up debt in my name posed immediate threats to my financial stability.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
David's advice was strategic rather than emotional. Document everything, secure my individual finances immediately, and prepare for a protracted legal battle that could last months. Most importantly, avoid any actions that could be construed as harassment or threats, no matter how outrageous their behavior became. The law favored careful documentation over righteous anger, patience over immediate satisfaction. Returning home from the legal consultation, I found that Marcus and Vanessa had made themselves even more comfortable in my absence. Vanessa's mother had indeed arrived, a sharp-featured woman named Patricia, who greeted me with the barely concealed hostility of someone who had been thoroughly briefed on my role as the unreasonable obstacle to her daughter's happiness. She had brought additional suitcases and bags, apparently planning an extended stay to help with pregnancy preparations and baby planning. The three of them had rearranged my living room furniture to better accommodate their vision of family life, moving my grandmother's antique writing desk to make space for a rocking chair Patricia had brought from Sacramento. They had also taken the liberty of ordering nursery furniture, with delivery expected within the week. The casual way they modified my inherited home while I was seeking legal advice demonstrated their complete dismissal of my authority in my own house. Patricia's presence added a new dynamic to an already impossible situation. Unlike her daughter's calculated sweetness or Marcus's practiced charm, she displayed open contempt for my resistance to their plans. In her view, I was a selfish woman standing in the way of proper family formation, refusing to accept the reality that my marriage was over and my husband needed to prioritize his unborn child. She spoke about me in the third person even when I was in the room, discussing my unreasonable attachment to material possessions and my apparent inability to gracefully accept life's changes. The weekend became an endurance test of psychological manipulation and territorial invasion. Patricia took over my kitchen, cooking elaborate meals that filled the house with unfamiliar smells while criticizing my equipment and organization. She rearranged my pantry according to her preferences, discarded items she deemed unhealthy for a pregnant household, and left passive-aggressive notes about proper nutrition and prenatal care. Vanessa spent hours on the phone with friends and relatives, describing her excitement about the beautiful Victorian house where she and Marcus would raise their child, speaking as if my displacement was already an accomplished fact. Marcus oscillated between guilt and resentment, occasionally pulling me aside for private conversations where he alternated between apologies for the difficult situation and frustration with my unwillingness to accept reality. He had never intended for things to become complicated, he insisted, but circumstances had forced his hand. Surely I could understand that a child changed everything, that his responsibilities as a father had to take precedence over the hurt feelings of a marriage that had been struggling anyway. These private conversations revealed the depth of his self-deception and revisionist thinking. In his version of our relationship, I had been increasingly distant and unreasonable, more focused on my pottery hobby than our marriage, resistant to his perfectly reasonable suggestions about our social life and household management. My failure to become pregnant after 3 years of marriage had been a source of tension, he claimed, though he had never expressed any urgency about starting a family during our actual conversations about the future. Most damaging was his casual revelation that this wasn't his first affair. There had been others over the years, brief encounters that meant nothing, he assured me, unlike his relationship with Vanessa, which had developed into something meaningful. The implication that I should feel grateful for his honesty about these previous betrayals, that his decision to leave me for Vanessa represented an upgrade in his commitment to fidelity, revealed a level of narcissism that left me speechless. Sunday evening brought the conversation that finally clarified the stakes of our confrontation. Patricia announced her intention to stay through Vanessa's delivery and the first few weeks of the baby's life, meaning my guest room would be occupied for at least the next 6 months. Marcus suggested this was actually beneficial for everyone, as Patricia could help with household management and childcare while he focused on work and I adjusted to our new arrangement. The assumption that I would willingly share my inherited home with 3 people who viewed me as an inconvenience to be managed rather than a person with rights crystallized my understanding of their strategy. They weren't seeking a temporary arrangement while they found their own place. They were planning a permanent colonization of my house, gradually pushing me further into the margins of my own life until I voluntarily departed in frustration and defeat. The nursery, the furniture deliveries, Patricia's extended stay, Marcus's casual discussions of household modifications were all designed to normalize their presence, while making mine increasingly uncomfortable and untenable. That night, alone in what should have been my guest room, I confronted the full scope of my situation. I was effectively homeless in my own house, financially vulnerable despite my stable income, professionally isolated from colleagues who knew Marcus through industry connections, and personally isolated from friends and family I had neglected during my marriage. The pottery studio in the basement remained my only sanctuary, the single space they hadn't yet claimed or contaminated with their presence. In that sanctuary, surrounded by clay pieces that represented my authentic self rather than the diminished version I had become in my marriage, I began planning my counterattack. The legal advice I had received provided the framework, but the strategy would require careful timing and flawless execution. Marcus and Vanessa had overplayed their hand by involving Patricia in making permanent modifications to my house. Their assumption that I would eventually surrender out of exhaustion or social pressure had created opportunities for devastating legal and financial consequences they hadn't anticipated. The woman who had meekly accepted years of subtle control and manipulation was gone, replaced by someone who finally understood the difference between temporary accommodation and permanent capitulation. They wanted a war over my house and my dignity, and they were about to discover that their opponent was far more formidable than they had imagined. Monday morning marked the beginning of my education in strategic warfare and the discovery of resources I hadn't known existed. While Marcus, Vanessa, and Patricia settled into their comfortable routine in my house, assuming my continued compliance with their domestic arrangement, I began implementing the careful plan I had developed during my sleepless weekend. The first step involved securing my financial independence before they could cause additional damage to our joint accounts. At precisely 9 o'clock, I walked into the downtown branch of our shared bank and requested to speak with the manager about separating my accounts from my husband's account. The conversation was illuminating in ways that both protected and horrified me. Marcus had indeed been moving money between our accounts in recent months, ostensibly to fund his business expansion, but actually to establish separate financial resources for his new family. However, my marketing salary had been the primary source of deposits, giving me stronger legal claims to our accumulated savings than he had probably realized. The bank manager, a professional woman named Lisa Park who had handled my business for years, proved unexpectedly helpful in navigating the legal requirements for financial separation during divorce proceedings. She had seen similar situations before and understood the urgency of protecting assets before they could be dissipated by an untrustworthy spouse. Within hours, I had established individual accounts, transferred my legal share of our savings, and removed Marcus's access to my credit cards and business accounts. More importantly, Lisa introduced me to the concept of forensic accounting, explaining how financial records could reveal patterns of deception and hidden assets that might prove crucial in divorce proceedings. Marcus's recent transactions showed regular cash withdrawals that couldn't be accounted for by normal business or household expenses, suggesting either hidden spending on Vanessa or the establishment of secret accounts. The documentation Lisa helped me gather would prove invaluable in demonstrating his premeditated deception. The afternoon brought my second crucial meeting with David Chen, this time armed with financial records and a clearer understanding of my goal. Rather than simply seeking to evict Marcus and Vanessa, I wanted to ensure that their betrayal carried lasting consequences that would discourage similar behavior toward future victims. David's experience with contentious divorces had taught him that the most effective settlements addressed both immediate protection and long-term deterrence. The legal strategy we developed was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its potential impact. Rather than immediately filing for divorce, which would trigger automatic protections for marital assets, I would first establish my absolute control over the house through formal eviction proceedings. Oregon law required 30 days' notice for month-to-month tenants, but Marcus and Vanessa had no tenant rights since they had never paid rent or signed a lease agreement. They were essentially squatters in my inherited property, subject to immediate removal once proper legal procedures were followed. The eviction process would serve multiple purposes beyond simply removing them from my house. It would create a legal record of their unauthorized occupancy, establish my serious intent to end the marriage, and force them to find alternative housing while spending money they might otherwise hide from divorce proceedings. Most significantly, it would shatter their comfortable assumption that I would eventually capitulate to their demands for permanent cohabitation. David also introduced me to Helen Morrison, a recently retired family court judge who had started a consulting practice helping women navigate complex divorce situations. Helen's reputation for creative legal strategies and her connections throughout the Portland legal community made her an invaluable ally for someone facing sophisticated financial manipulation. Her initial assessment of my situation was blunt and encouraging. Marcus and Vanessa had made several critical errors that would prove costly in family court. Their decision to establish residence in my inherited house created potential claims for alienation of affection and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Vanessa's pregnancy, rather than providing legal protection, actually created additional complications since her relationship with Marcus had clearly begun while he was married. Most importantly, their attempts to modify my house for permanent occupancy could be construed as conversion of my separate property for their benefit. Helen's decades of experience had taught her that the most successful divorce strategies combined legal precision with psychological insight. Marcus's personality profile suggested he would respond poorly to public exposure of his behavior, particularly within the professional architectural community where reputation was crucial for business success. The key was creating pressure that made fighting the divorce more costly than accepting reasonable settlement terms. The psychological strategy involved documenting every aspect of their intrusion into my life while maintaining scrupulous legal behavior myself. Helen recommended keeping detailed journals of their actions, photographing any modifications they made to my house, and recording conversations when possible under Oregon's one-party consent law. The goal was building an overwhelming case for their unreasonable behavior while demonstrating my own restraint and maturity. Tuesday brought the first test of my new strategic approach when Patricia announced her intention to host a baby shower for Vanessa in my living room. The guest list included several wives of Marcus's business associates, women I had considered friends but who apparently felt comfortable celebrating my husband's infidelity in my inherited home. The casual assumption that I would either participate enthusiastically or absent myself entirely revealed their complete disregard for my feelings and rights. Instead of the emotional outburst they probably expected, I responded with cool professionalism that clearly unsettled them. I explained that since the house was my separate property inherited from my grandmother, any large gatherings would require my explicit permission and appropriate insurance coverage. I suggested they might want to consider alternative venues that would be more suitable for their celebration and less legally complicated for everyone involved. Patricia's face flushed with anger at my unexpected resistance, but Marcus quickly intervened with his practiced diplomatic skill. He suggested we could discuss the details later when emotions weren't running quite so high, but his eyes revealed growing concern about my changed demeanor. The compliant wife he had manipulated for years was clearly gone, replaced by someone who understood both her rights and her power. The conversation about the baby shower became a turning point in their perception of our living arrangement. For the first time since their initial revelation, Marcus and Vanessa seemed to recognize that I might not quietly disappear from my own house whenever their plans required my absence. The legal implications of hosting events in someone else's inherited property without permission began to dawn on them as I calmly explained my concerns about liability and insurance coverage. Wednesday brought my first meeting with Rachel Kim, a successful gallery owner in Portland's Pearl District who had been recommended by my former pottery instructor. Rachel's gallery specialized in local artisans and had built a reputation for discovering emerging talent in the Pacific Northwest ceramics community. Our conversation began as a general discussion about my work but quickly evolved into something more significant. Rachel had been following my pottery development through social media posts and community college exhibitions, recognizing a distinctive style that appealed to her sophisticated clientele. My pieces combined traditional ceramic techniques with contemporary design elements that reflected both skill and artistic vision. More importantly, my background in marketing provided insights into brand development and customer engagement that most artists lack. The opportunity Rachel presented was transformative in ways that extended far beyond financial independence. She wanted to feature my work in a spring exhibition, showcasing Northwest ceramic artists, with the possibility of ongoing representation if sales justified continued collaboration. The exhibition would provide exposure to serious collectors and interior designers who appreciated original work and had budgets to support emerging artists. More immediately, Rachel offered me a part-time position, managing her gallery's digital marketing and social media presence, work I could do remotely while continuing to develop my pottery skill. The combination of commission sales from my artwork and steady income from marketing work would provide complete financial independence from Marcus, eliminating one of his primary sources of control over my decision. The meeting with Rachel reminded me of who I had been before I gradually diminished myself to accommodate Marcus's ego and demand. The confident marketing professional who had built successful campaigns for major clients was still there, temporarily buried under years of subtle manipulation but not permanently damaged. The artist who had created beautiful functional pieces was also still there, waiting for permission to take herself seriously again. Thursday's confrontation with Marcus and Vanessa about the formal eviction notice I had served revealed the extent to which they had underestimated both my legal knowledge and my determination. The 30-day notice to quit, properly served and legally documented, forced them to confront the reality that their comfortable assumptions about permanent residence in my house were legally baseless. Marcus's angry demands for explanation, met with calm references to Oregon landlord-tenant law and my absolute rights as the property owner. Vanessa's tears and appeals to my sympathy for her pregnancy fell flat against my new understanding of manipulation tactics. Helen Morrison had warned me that they would escalate emotional pressure as legal pressure increased, trying to guilt me into abandoning my rights for the sake of an unborn child who was not my responsibility. The key was maintaining consistent boundaries while documenting their attempts at emotional manipulation for future legal proceedings. The legal notice also forced them to reveal their true financial situation, which proved even more precarious than I had suspected. Marcus's business was struggling more than he had admitted, with several major projects delayed and cash flow problems that made finding suitable alternative housing difficult. Vanessa's part-time income was minimal, and Patricia's retirement resources were insufficient to support 3 adults and a baby in Portland's expensive rental market. Their financial desperation created opportunities for strategic advantage in divorce negotiation. Rather than being the wealthy, successful architect I had believed myself married to, Marcus was apparently leveraging our joint assets to maintain his professional image while his business faced serious challenges. The house I had inherited represented not just shelter but the primary asset available to fund their new family, which explained their determination to establish permanent residence, regardless of my wishes. Friday brought the revelation that would fundamentally change my understanding of the situation and my approach to resolving it. While researching Marcus's business finances for potential divorce proceedings, David Chen's investigator discovered that Marcus had been systematically diverting client payments into personal accounts, apparently to fund his relationship with Vanessa and prepare for their life together. The amounts involved weren't enormous, but the pattern suggested embezzlement that could result in criminal charges and professional license suspension. This discovery transformed my divorce from a personal matter into a potential criminal case that would destroy Marcus's career and reputation regardless of our settlement term. The evidence suggested he had been stealing from clients for at least 18 months, using his trusted position as their architect to redirect payments intended for contractors and suppliers. The shortage had forced several projects into delays and cost overruns that were damaging his professional relationship. More significantly, the stolen money had funded the elaborate courtship of Vanessa, including expensive gifts, weekend getaways, and the security deposit for an apartment they had apparently planned to share once he left me. The apartment lease, signed 2 months earlier but never occupied, revealed that their invasion of my house had been a temporary measure after their original plans fell through due to Marcus's deteriorating business situation. Armed with this information, my strategy shifted from defensive protection of my rights to offensive action that would ensure lasting consequences for their betrayal.
Rather than simply evicting them and divorcing Marcus, I would expose his criminal behavior to both law enforcement and his professional licensing board. The devastation to his career would serve as deterrent to future women who might consider targeting married men for financial support. The weekend brought intensive preparation for the confrontation that would end their comfortable occupation of my house and begin their education in the real consequences of their choices. Helen Morrison helped me coordinate with criminal attorneys who specialized in white-collar crime, ensuring that my divorce proceedings wouldn't interfere with potential criminal charges. David Chen prepared the formal divorce papers that would be served simultaneously with criminal complaints, maximizing the psychological impact of their legal jeopardy. Most importantly, I spent time in my basement studio, creating new pottery pieces that reflected my emotional journey from victim to victor. The clay responded to my hands with familiar comfort, each piece representing another step toward reclaiming my authentic self. The kiln that Marcus had complained about was fired up for the first time in months, filling the basement with the heat and energy of creative transformation. By Sunday evening, I was ready for the confrontation that would shatter their assumptions about my continued compliance with their outrageous demands. They had mistaken my shock for weakness, my politeness for surrender, and my kindness for stupidity. Monday morning would begin their education in the difference between temporary patience and permanent submission, a lesson that would prove far more expensive than they could possibly imagine. The transformation that began with my legal and financial preparations accelerated dramatically once I started working with Rachel Kim at her Pearl District Gallery. The part-time marketing position provided more than just income independence. It reconnected me with the confident professional woman I had been before I gradually diminished myself to accommodate Marcus's expanding ego. Within weeks, I was developing digital campaigns that increased gallery traffic by 40% and created social media buzz around upcoming exhibitions. More significantly, my pottery work flourished under Rachel's mentorship and the inspiration of working alongside other serious artists. The gallery's community of ceramicists, painters, and sculptors provided the creative environment I had unknowingly craved during my isolated years with Marcus. Evening workshops and weekend studio sessions replaced the social obligations that had previously dominated my schedule, filling my life with people who valued artistic expression over material status. My pieces began reflecting the emotional journey from betrayal to empowerment, each vessel and sculpture capturing different stages of my awakening. The early works were dark and angular, expressing rage and confusion through jagged edges and murky glazes. As weeks passed, the pieces became more fluid and luminous, incorporating techniques I learned from fellow artists who shared their knowledge without competition or judgment. Rachel described my evolving style as Phoenix ceramics, explaining how collectors responded to the obvious transformation story embedded in the work. The upcoming spring exhibition became both goal and deadline for my artistic development. Rachel had committed to featuring 12 of my pieces alongside work from 5 other Pacific Northwest ceramicists, representing a significant investment in my potential. The pressure was intimidating but energizing, pushing me to refine techniques and explore themes that had been suppressed during my marriage. Each day brought new discoveries about my capabilities and artistic vision. Meanwhile, the legal proceedings against Marcus intensified with devastating effectiveness. The criminal investigation into his business practices had uncovered a more extensive pattern of client fund diversion than initially suspected, involving at least 8 projects and nearly $60,000 in misappropriated payment. His professional license was suspended pending resolution of the criminal charges, effectively ending his architectural career regardless of the ultimate legal outcome. The suspension notice had been delivered to his office on a busy Tuesday morning when several clients and contractors were present, ensuring maximum professional humiliation. Word spread quickly through Portland's architectural community, destroying relationships Marcus had spent years building and eliminating any possibility of rebuilding his practice after the criminal case concluded. The man who had been so concerned about his professional reputation had lost it entirely through his own greed and recklessness. Vanessa's reaction to Marcus's professional downfall revealed the calculating nature of her attachment to him. Rather than supporting her pregnant partner through his legal troubles, she began distancing herself from his situation and exploring alternative options for her future. Her conversations with her mother, which I occasionally overheard from my basement studio, focused increasingly on financial practicalities rather than emotional support for the father of her unborn child. Patricia's extended stay in my house became increasingly uncomfortable as the legal and financial pressures mounted. Her initial hostility toward me evolved into grudging respect as she recognized that I had outmaneuvered her daughter and son-in-law completely. The sharp-tongued woman who had dismissed me as a selfish obstacle to her daughter's happiness began treating me with wary politeness, clearly recognizing that her own comfort depended on my continued tolerance of her presence. The 30-day eviction notice created a deadline that forced them to confront their precarious situation honestly. With Marcus's income eliminated and his business assets frozen pending criminal proceedings, they lacked resources to secure appropriate housing for a pregnant woman and newborn baby. Their desperate appeals to relatives and friends met with limited success, as news of Marcus's legal troubles spread through their social network. My response to their housing crisis was strategically calculated to demonstrate both reasonable accommodation and firm boundaries. Through David Chen, I offered to extend their occupancy for an additional 30 days in exchange for signed agreements acknowledging my sole ownership of the house and their status as temporary guests rather than tenants. The agreement also required them to pay market-rate rent for their occupancy and deposit funds to cover any damages or modifications they had made to my property. The rental arrangement served multiple legal purposes beyond generating income. It established clear documentation of our relationship for divorce proceedings, eliminated any potential claims to tenant rights or property interests, and created financial pressure that encouraged their departure. More importantly, it forced them to acknowledge in writing that their presence in my house was entirely dependent on my generosity rather than any legal entitlement. Marcus's signature on the rental agreement represented a fundamental shift in our power dynamic. The man who had confidently announced his intention to establish permanent residence in my inherited house was now begging for temporary shelter while facing criminal prosecution. His attempts to negotiate more favorable terms met with cool professionalism rather than the emotional reactivity he had learned to manipulate during our marriage. The criminal attorney handling Marcus's case recommended a plea agreement that would minimize jail time in exchange for full restitution to his clients and permanent surrender of his professional license. The financial requirements of the plea deal would consume most of our marital assets, including his business equipment and client relationships, leaving him essentially bankrupt and unemployable in his chosen profession. The man who had jeopardized our marriage for financial gain would emerge from the legal process with nothing to show for his betrayal. As Marcus's situation deteriorated, my own circumstances improved dramatically. The gallery work provided intellectual stimulation and professional recognition I had forgotten I craved. My pottery was generating significant interest from collectors who appreciated both the technical skill and emotional authenticity of my piece. Most importantly, I was rebuilding social connections with people who valued my authentic self rather than my role as someone's supportive wife. The artist community at Rachel's Gallery became my new extended family, offering support and encouragement that felt genuinely motivated by friendship rather than social obligation. Evening conversations over wine and shared meals replaced the sterile networking events that had dominated my social calendar during my marriage. Weekend pottery workshops and gallery openings filled my schedule with activities I chose rather than obligations I accepted to support Marcus's career. My sister Claire flew up from San Francisco for a long weekend visit that marked our first meaningful conversation in over 2 years. Her initial anger about my failure to confide in her about my marriage problems gave way to amazement at my transformation and pride in my handling of the crisis. She had never liked Marcus, she admitted, but had restrained her criticism to avoid damaging our relationship. Seeing me confident and creative again reminded her of the woman I had been before I gradually lost myself in accommodating his demand. Claire's visit also provided perspective on how drastically my life had changed in just 2 months. She photographed my pottery pieces for her own social media, describing my work to her San Francisco friends in terms that emphasized my artistic talent rather than my divorce drama. Her outsider's view helped me recognize that I was no longer defined by my victimization but by my choices in responding to betrayal. The upcoming criminal sentencing hearing would provide closure for Marcus's professional downfall, but my focus had shifted toward building my new life rather than dwelling on his consequences. The spring gallery exhibition was scheduled for early March, giving me 6 weeks to complete my featured pieces and prepare for what Rachel described as a potential career-launching event. The pressure was enormous but energizing, representing the kind of challenge I had craved during my stagnant marriage. My new rental arrangement with Marcus, Vanessa, and Patricia generated enough income to cover all household expenses while building savings for my artistic career. The irony of charging my cheating husband rent to live in my inherited house provided daily satisfaction, but more importantly, the financial independence eliminated any remaining economic ties between us. The woman who had discovered her husband's pregnant mistress in her living room was now profiting from their desperation while pursuing her authentic dreams. The pottery studio that had been my refuge during the darkest days of my marriage became the center of my new life's purpose and meaning. The kiln that Marcus had complained about now fired pieces that generated serious income and artistic recognition. The clay dust he had criticized as messy now coated my hands as I created work that expressed my authentic vision rather than accommodated his preference. The basement space that had been my hidden retreat was now the foundation of my independent future. February brought the news that would finalize my separation from Marcus's legal troubles while securing my own financial future. The plea agreement required him to liquidate all business assets and surrender his professional tools, but my inherited house and personal pottery equipment were protected as separate property. The divorce settlement, negotiated simultaneously with the criminal case, left me with complete ownership of the house and no responsibility for his restitution payments or legal debt. More significantly, Vanessa's increasing desperation led her to accept a job offer in Seattle that would take her away from Portland before the baby's birth. Her mother had arranged a position with her former employer, providing health insurance and maternity leave benefits that Marcus's destroyed career couldn't offer. Their departure would finally restore my house to its peaceful status while eliminating the daily reminders of betrayal and invasion. The spring exhibition opening was scheduled for the same week as their planned departure, creating a symbolic transition from victim to victor that felt orchestrated by cosmic justice. The woman who had been abandoned emotionally would celebrate her artistic rebirth while the people who had betrayed her struggled with the consequences of their choices. Marcus's sentencing hearing was scheduled for the following week, ensuring that his legal consequences would follow immediately after my professional triumph. As March approached, I spent increasing time in my studio preparing for the exhibition that would establish my credentials as a serious artist rather than a hobbyist seeking therapy through clay. The pieces selected for display told the story of transformation from betrayal to empowerment, each vessel representing another stage in my journey toward authentic self-expression. Rachel's confidence in my work was validated by pre-exhibition interest from collectors who had heard about my upcoming debut. The woman who had discovered her husband's pregnant mistress making herself comfortable in her inherited living room was preparing to celebrate the opening of her first professional art exhibition in one of Portland's most respected galleries. The journey from victim to victor had required strategic thinking, legal precision, and artistic courage, but the destination promised freedom and authenticity that made every difficult decision worthwhile. The morning of my gallery exhibition opening dawned crisp and clear, the kind of perfect March day that makes Portland's reputation for gray skies seem like deliberate misinformation. I woke in my own master bedroom, reclaimed the previous week when Marcus, Vanessa, and Patricia finally departed for Seattle, leaving behind only cleaned rooms and a forwarded address for final legal documents. The house felt spacious and peaceful again, filled with my grandmother's antique furniture and my own pottery pieces rather than the detritus of other people's dramatic lives. Rachel had scheduled the opening for 6 o'clock, allowing time for the gallery's regular clientele to attend after work while creating an evening event atmosphere that encouraged serious consideration of the featured artwork. My 12 pieces were displayed throughout the main gallery space, each accompanied by subtle lighting that emphasized the glaze work and surface textures I had labored over during the winter months. The transformation story embedded in the collection was obvious to anyone who studied the progression from dark, angular early pieces to the luminous, flowing work I had completed just weeks earlier. The afternoon brought final preparations that felt surreal after months of legal battles and emotional upheaval. My hair appointment with a stylist recommended by one of the other featured artists resulted in a dramatic cut that framed my face and emphasized the confident woman I had become rather than the compliant wife I had been. The new dress I had chosen, a flowing design in deep blue that complemented my favorite pottery glazes, represented the first clothing purchase I had made entirely for my own pleasure rather than Marcus's approval. Claire had flown up from San Francisco again, this time accompanied by 2 college friends I hadn't seen in years, who wanted to support my artistic debut. Their presence reminded me of the friendships I had gradually abandoned during my marriage, relationships sacrificed to accommodate Marcus's social preferences and professional obligations. The afternoon we spent together, laughing and catching up while preparing for the evening, felt like reclaiming pieces of my identity that had been stored away rather than permanently lost. As 5 o'clock approached, I walked through my reclaimed house one final time before departing for the gallery. Each room reflected my authentic taste rather than compromises made to accommodate someone else's vision. The master bedroom was arranged around my grandmother's antique vanity rather than Marcus's oversized television. The living room showcased my pottery collection and art books rather than his architectural magazines and professional awards. Most significantly, the basement studio was fully mine again, organized for productivity rather than hidden away like a guilty secret. The drive to the Pearl District Gallery gave me time to reflect on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 6 months earlier, I had been a woman who defined herself primarily through her role as a supportive wife, gradually diminishing her own ambitions to accommodate her husband's expanding demand. The shock of discovering Marcus and Vanessa in my living room had initially felt like the end of everything I thought I knew about my life, but it had actually been the beginning of discovering who I truly was beneath years of careful accommodation and self-suppression. Parking near the gallery, I could see warm light spilling from the large windows and the silhouettes of early arrivals already examining the artwork. Rachel had warned me that opening nights were always nerve-wracking for featured artists, but the anxiety I felt was different from the constant tension that had characterized my marriage. This was the productive nervousness of someone about to be judged on her authentic work rather than the exhausting vigilance of someone constantly monitoring another person's moods and expectations. The gallery space had been transformed since my last visit, with professional lighting that made each piece glow and carefully arranged sightlines that encouraged visitors to move naturally through the space while discovering new details about the featured work. My collection was integrated with pieces from the other 4 ceramicists, but Rachel had given my transformation series a prominent wall that allowed viewers to see the complete emotional journey from betrayal to empowerment. The effect was more powerful than I had anticipated. Each piece clearly connected to the next while standing alone as individual artistic statements. Rachel greeted me at the door with a smile that mixed professional confidence with genuine excitement. Early sales were already promising, she reported, with 2 collectors having inquired about purchasing pieces before the official opening even began. The gallery's regular clients had come to trust her judgment about emerging artists, and several had specifically requested previews of my work after seeing the promotional material she had distributed through her professional network. The first hour of the opening flew by in a blur of conversations with strangers who seemed genuinely interested in both my artistic techniques and the personal story behind the work. Portland's art community was smaller and more interconnected than I had realized, with many attendees knowing each other from previous exhibitions and collaborative projects. Being introduced as a serious emerging artist rather than someone's supportive spouse felt revolutionary after years of defining myself through my relationship to Marcus rather than my own accomplishment. One conversation particularly stood out, with an interior designer named Michael who specialized in high-end residential projects throughout the Pacific Northwest. He was drawn to the functional beauty of my pottery, explaining how handmade pieces added warmth and authenticity to homes that might otherwise feel sterile despite their expensive furnishing. His interest went beyond casual appreciation. He wanted to discuss commissioning custom pieces for specific clients and potentially featuring my work in upcoming design projects. The possibility of developing a sustainable income stream through commissioned pottery represented financial independence that went far beyond what I had achieved through my marketing work at the gallery.
Michael's clients were willing to pay premium prices for unique artistic pieces that reflected both quality craftsmanship and compelling personal stories. My transformation narrative, rather than being a source of embarrassment or vulnerability, had become a marketing asset that distinguished my work from other ceramicists in the competitive Portland art scene. As the evening progressed, I found myself engaged in conversations that stretched my thinking about art, creativity, and the relationship between personal experience and artistic expression. The other featured artists were generous with their knowledge and encouragement, sharing insights about technique and business practices that would have taken years to discover independently. The sense of belonging to a community of serious artists felt like coming home to a part of myself I had forgotten existed. Around 8 o'clock, as the opening was reaching its peak attendance, I noticed a familiar figure examining my earliest pieces near the back of the gallery. Marcus stood alone, dressed in the expensive casual wear that had once impressed me but now seemed like costume jewelry compared to the authentic confidence of the artists surrounding me. His presence at my exhibition felt surreal, like encountering a character from a half-remembered dream in the middle of waking life. Our eyes met across the crowded gallery, and for a moment neither of us moved. The man who had once controlled my social calendar and professional aspirations was now an unwelcome intruder at my artistic debut, his very presence a reminder of the life I had escaped rather than the life I was building. His expression mixed surprise, curiosity, and something that might have been regret as he took in the scope of my artistic accomplishment and the obvious respect I commanded within this community. I excused myself from a conversation about glaze chemistry and walked slowly toward Marcus, feeling the confidence that had grown over months of legal battles and artistic development. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, not just by his legal troubles but by the contrast between his isolated presence and my integration into this vibrant creative community. The man who had once seemed so sophisticated and worldly now appeared out of place among people who valued authentic expression over professional status. His opening words revealed the same self-centered perspective that had characterized our entire relationship. He congratulated me on my success as if he had played some role in encouraging my artistic development, conveniently forgetting his years of complaints about my pottery hobby and his attempts to convert my studio space for his convenience. His tone suggested that my exhibition was a pleasant surprise, rather than the culmination of talents he had systematically discouraged and dismissed. The conversation that followed was mercifully brief, but illuminating in its demonstration of how completely our power dynamic had shifted. Marcus attempted to engage me as if we were still connected, asking about my plans for the future and commenting on pieces as if his opinion carried weight in my artistic decision. His casual assumption that I would welcome his presence at my opening revealed the same obliviousness that had characterized his approach to our marriage and its destruction. When he mentioned that Vanessa had given birth to their daughter the previous week, I felt only mild curiosity rather than the devastating pain such news might have caused months earlier. The baby represented his responsibility and consequence rather than my loss, a reminder of choices he had made that had freed me to pursue my authentic path. His obvious expectation that I would ask about his new family or express some emotion about their situation met with polite disinterest that clearly confused him. The most revealing moment came when Marcus suggested we might remain friends despite everything that had happened between us. The proposal that we could somehow maintain a casual relationship while he raised his daughter with the woman who had invaded my home demonstrated his fundamental inability to understand the magnitude of his betrayal or the completeness of my transformation. The woman who had once accommodated his every demand would not be providing emotional support for his adjustment to fatherhood. Rachel appeared at my elbow during this conversation, introducing herself to Marcus with professional courtesy while making it clear that my attention was needed elsewhere in the gallery. The interruption provided a natural conclusion to our exchange, allowing me to return to conversations with people who actually mattered to my future rather than remnants from my past. Marcus lingered for a few more minutes before departing, his solitary exit a stark contrast to my integration into the evening's celebratory atmosphere. The remainder of the opening exceeded all expectations, with 7 of my 12 pieces selling to collectors who appreciated both the artistic merit and the transformation story behind the work. Rachel's excitement was infectious as she tallied the sales figures, explaining how unusual it was for an emerging artist to achieve such strong commercial success at her debut exhibition. The validation was overwhelming, confirming that my artistic vision had genuine market value beyond personal therapeutic benefits. More importantly, the connections made during the evening promised ongoing opportunities for growth and development. 3 different galleries had expressed interest in featuring my work in future group exhibitions, and 2 private collectors had requested studio visits to discuss commissioning custom pieces. The foundation for a sustainable artistic career was being laid in real time, built on authentic creative expression rather than strategic networking or professional manipulation. As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, I helped Rachel with cleanup while discussing plans for ongoing representation in future exhibitions. Her confidence in my potential was based on concrete evidence rather than supportive encouragement, making her professional guidance invaluable for navigating the business aspects of an artistic career. The partnership we were developing represented the kind of mutually beneficial relationship I had craved during my marriage, but never experienced. The drive home through Portland's quiet streets gave me time to process the evening's significance beyond the immediate excitement of artistic success. The woman who had discovered her husband's pregnant mistress making herself comfortable in her inherited living room had just celebrated her professional debut as a respected ceramic artist. The transformation was complete, not because the pain had disappeared, but because it had been alchemized into something beautiful and valuable. Arriving at my reclaimed house,
I walked through each room appreciating the peaceful silence that had replaced months of tension and invasion. The master bedroom was arranged according to my preferences rather than someone else's convenience. The kitchen reflected my cooking style rather than accommodating a pregnant stranger's dietary demand. Most significantly, the basement studio was fully equipped and organized for productivity rather than hidden away like a guilty secret requiring justification. The pottery pieces I had in progress down in the studio represented the next chapter of my artistic development, building on techniques mastered during my transformation period while exploring new themes and creative challenges. The commissioned work that would likely result from the evening's connections would provide financial stability while allowing continued artistic growth. The future I was building belonged entirely to me, shaped by my choices rather than someone else's expectation. As I prepared for bed in my own master bedroom, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment of triumph and independence. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of discovering my authentic self beneath years of accommodation and compromise. The shock of finding strangers claiming my inherited home had ultimately led to reclaiming not just my physical space, but my creative identity and professional autonomy. The legal battles that had consumed months of energy and resources had served their purpose in establishing clear boundaries and consequences for betrayal while protecting my assets and dignity. Marcus's criminal prosecution and professional destruction represented justice not just for his treatment of me, but for the clients he had stolen from to fund his deception. The system had worked exactly as it should, rewarding honesty and punishing fraud. More significantly, the artistic community I had discovered through Rachel's gallery provided the sense of belonging and recognition I had unconsciously craved throughout my marriage. Being valued for my authentic talents and creative vision rather than my ability to support someone else's ambitions felt revolutionary after years of defining myself through my relationship to market. The friendships developing within this community were based on shared interests and mutual respect rather than social obligation or professional network. The financial independence I had achieved through both legal settlements and artistic sales eliminated the last vestiges of dependency that had characterized my marriage. The house that Marcus and Vanessa had tried to claim was now generating income through studio sales and commissioned work rather than serving as shelter for people who felt entitled to my generosity. The basement space that had been my hidden refuge was now the foundation of a thriving artistic practice that commanded respect and premium prices. The woman who had been abandoned in her own living room while her husband's pregnant mistress made renovation plans had emerged victorious not through revenge but through transformation. The pottery that Marcus had dismissed as a wasteful hobby had become the foundation of my professional identity and financial security. The artistic vision he had discouraged was now recognized and celebrated by collectors who appreciated both technical skill and authentic expression. Looking ahead, the future held possibilities that would have been unimaginable during my marriage. The upcoming solo exhibition Rachel was planning would feature new work exploring themes beyond personal transformation, establishing my artistic identity independently of my divorce story. The commissioned pieces would provide steady income while challenging me to interpret other people's visions through my own technical abilities and creative perspective. Most importantly, the authentic relationships I was building within Portland's artistic community promised the kind of genuine connection and mutual support I had never experienced during my marriage. These were friendships based on shared passion for creative expression rather than social convenience or professional advancement. The conversations about technique and inspiration that filled my evenings were energizing rather than draining, stimulating rather than obligatory. The house that had once felt invaded and contaminated by strangers was now restored to its role as sanctuary and workspace, each room reflecting my authentic preferences rather than uncomfortable compromise. The master bedroom had been reclaimed and redecorated to emphasize comfort and beauty rather than accommodate someone else's television viewing habits. The kitchen was organized for my cooking style rather than a pregnant stranger's dietary restrictions and entertaining demands. The basement studio that had been my secret refuge during the worst days of my marriage was now the proud center of my professional artistic practice, filled with works in progress and equipped with tools that generated income rather than serving as expensive hobbies requiring justification. The kiln that Marcus had complained about was now fired regularly to create pieces that sold for premium prices to collectors who appreciated handmade pottery's unique beauty and authentic character. As sleep approached, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment of complete independence and authentic self-expression. The betrayal that had initially shattered my understanding of my life and marriage had ultimately freed me to discover capabilities and interests that had been suppressed for years. The shock of finding my husband's pregnant mistress in my living room had led to reclaiming not just my physical space but my creative identity and professional autonomy. The legal battles that had consumed months of energy had established clear consequences for betrayal while protecting my assets and dignity from further attack. The artistic development that had begun as therapy had evolved into a respected professional practice that generated both income and recognition within Portland's competitive creative community. Most importantly, the authentic relationships I was building promised genuine connection and mutual support rather than the exhausting vigilance that had characterized my marriage. The woman who had been abandoned emotionally and literally by her husband was now surrounded by people who valued her authentic talents and supported her creative development. The transformation was complete not because the pain had disappeared but because it had been transformed into something beautiful and valuable that would continue growing and evolving as I developed my artistic vision and professional reputation. The future I was building belonged entirely to me, shaped by choices that reflected my authentic interests and values rather than accommodation to someone else's expectations and demands. The pottery studio that had been hidden away like a guilty secret was now the foundation of a thriving artistic practice that commanded respect and premium prices from collectors who appreciated both technical skill and authentic expression. Tomorrow would bring new creative challenges and professional opportunities, built on the foundation of independence and authenticity I had fought so hard to establish and protect. The woman who had discovered her husband's pregnant mistress making renovation plans in her inherited living room was now planning her own renovations to better accommodate her flourishing artistic practice and the community of creators who had become her chosen family. The journey from victim to victor had required strategic thinking, legal precision, and artistic courage, but the destination promised continued growth and authentic self-expression that would have been impossible within the constraints of my marriage. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of discovering who I really was beneath years of careful accommodation and gradual self-suppression. The transformation story that began with shock and devastation in my living room had concluded with triumph and recognition in Portland's most respected gallery, surrounded by people who valued authentic creative expression over social status or professional advancement. The woman Marcus had underestimated and abandoned had emerged stronger, more talented, and infinitely more authentic than she had ever been while trying to accommodate his expanding demands and disappearing respect. As consciousness faded into peaceful sleep in my reclaimed master bedroom, I smiled at the completeness of my transformation and the authentic future I was building through my own choices and creative vision. The pottery that Marcus had dismissed was now supporting my independence. The artistic community he had never understood was now providing genuine friendship and professional opportunity, and the house he had tried to claim was now serving as both sanctuary and successful studio for work that commanded respect and premium price. The woman who had been abandoned was now exactly where she belonged, surrounded by beauty she had created with her own hands and supported by relationships built on authentic connection rather than social obligation. The transformation was complete, but the story was just beginning as I prepared to explore new artistic territories and build deeper connections within the creative community that had welcomed me as a respected colleague rather than someone's accommodating spouse. The shock of betrayal had become the foundation of authentic success, the pain of abandonment had transformed into the joy of independence, and the invasion of my home had led to reclaiming not just my physical space, but my creative identity and professional autonomy. Marcus's attempt to break me had actually freed me to become the artist and woman I was always meant to be, stronger and more authentic than I had ever imagined possible during the years of gradual compromise and careful accommodation that had characterized our marriage. The weeks following my gallery debut brought a steady stream of opportunities that confirmed my transition from hobbyist to professional artist was not only complete but accelerating beyond anything I had dared hope for during those dark months of betrayal and legal battle. Michael, the interior designer who had shown such interest in my work at the opening, contacted me within days to discuss commissioning a complete dinnerware set for a tech executive's new home in the hills overlooking Portland. The project would challenge my production capabilities while providing income that exceeded what I had earned monthly in my marketing career. The commission meeting took place at the client's stunning contemporary home, where floor-to-ceiling windows framed views of Mount Hood and the Columbia River Gorge. Jessica Chen, a software company founder in her early 40s, had built her success on attention to detail and appreciation for authentic craftsmanship that reflected her values rather than simply displaying wealth. She wanted pottery that would serve as functional art, pieces beautiful enough to showcase, but durable enough for daily use by someone who entertained frequently but valued substance over showiness. Walking through Jessica's home while discussing her vision for custom pottery, I felt a profound shift in how I perceived my own capabilities and professional work. This wasn't someone offering charity or encouraging a therapeutic hobby. This was a successful businesswoman investing significant money in my artistic vision because she recognized both technical skill and aesthetic sensibility that would enhance her living environment. The respect and attention she paid to my suggestions about glaze choices and functional design confirmed that my transformation from accommodating wife to independent artist was visible to others, not just an internal change I hoped was real. The technical challenges of creating a 60-piece dinnerware set pushed me to refine production methods and develop consistency standards that bridged the gap between individual artistic pieces and functional pottery suitable for regular use. Each bowl, plate, and serving piece needed to reflect my distinctive style while maintaining the uniformity expected in a coordinated set. The project required establishing systems for measuring, forming, and glazing that could produce predictable results without sacrificing the handmade character that distinguished my work from mass-produced alternatives. Rachel's mentorship proved invaluable as I navigated the business aspects of large commission work, from establishing realistic timelines to structuring payment schedules that protected both my time investment and cash flow needs. Her experience with other ceramic artists who had made similar transitions helped me anticipate challenges and avoid mistakes that could damage my growing reputation. Most importantly, she connected me with other professionals in Portland's creative community who could provide specialized services like photography for documentation and shipping consultation for safe delivery of finished pieces. The studio space in my basement, which had served adequately for individual pieces and small collections, required significant reorganization to accommodate production-scale work while maintaining the intimate creative environment that inspired my best effort. I invested part of the commission advance payment in additional equipment, including a larger kiln that could fire multiple pieces simultaneously and improved ventilation systems that made longer studio sessions more comfortable. The transformation of the space reflected my evolution from secretive hobbyist to confident professional with tools and materials organized for efficiency rather than hidden away to avoid criticism. Working on Jessica's commission during the day while continuing to develop new artistic pieces for future exhibitions created a productive rhythm that filled my schedule with purposeful activity, rather than the anxious monitoring of someone else's moods that had characterized my marriage. The basement studio became my favorite place in the house, filled with works in progress and the satisfaction of creating beautiful objects that would enhance other people's daily lives while providing my financial independence. The contrast with my previous existence, where my time was largely structured around Marcus's professional needs and social preferences, was remarkable and liberating. Spring moved into early summer as my reputation within Portland's artistic community continued growing through word-of-mouth recommendations and the visibility provided by Rachel's gallery representation. 2 additional interior designers contacted me about potential commissions, and a high-end restaurant in the Pearl District inquired about creating custom serving pieces that would reflect their farm-to-table philosophy. Each new opportunity validated my decision to pursue authentic creative expression rather than returning to corporate marketing, where success had always felt dependent on accommodating other people's visions rather than developing my own. The emotional healing that accompanied this professional success was perhaps perhaps even more significant than the financial independence I was achieving. The daily practice of creating beautiful objects with my own hands provided a form of meditation that gradually replaced the anxiety and hypervigilance that had become my normal state during the final years of my marriage. Each piece that emerged successfully from the kiln represented not just artistic accomplishment, but evidence of my capability to transform raw materials into something valuable through skill, patience, and creative vision. The legal resolution of my divorce proceeded smoothly during this period, with Marcus's criminal conviction and professional disgrace eliminating any leverage he might have used to complicate proceedings or make unreasonable demands about our limited shared assets. His plea agreement required full restitution to the clients he had defrauded, consuming what remained of his business resources and leaving him essentially bankrupt. The man who had once controlled our joint finances was now working construction jobs to meet his court-ordered payment schedules, a dramatic reversal that felt like cosmic justice rather than personal revenge.
Vanessa's situation proved even more precarious, as Marcus's criminal conviction and job loss left her solely responsible for supporting their infant daughter, while managing the practical challenges of single motherhood. Her attempts to contact me through mutual acquaintances, apparently seeking some form of reconciliation or assistance, met with polite but firm refusal conveyed through David Chen's office. The woman who had made herself comfortable in my inherited home while planning my displacement was now discovering the difference between fantasizing about someone else's lifestyle and actually building financial security through her own efforts. The contrast between their deteriorating circumstances and my flourishing independence provided perspective on the different paths available to people facing crisis situations. Marcus and Vanessa had chosen deception, manipulation, and entitlement as strategies for achieving their goals, ultimately destroying not only my trust, but their own stability and reputation. My response had emphasized legal precision, authentic self-expression, and building genuine relationships within a community that valued integrity and creativity. The different outcomes reflected the fundamental differences in our approaches to challenge and opportunity. Summer brought new creative challenges as I began developing pieces for my first solo exhibition, scheduled for September at a respected gallery in Seattle that specialized in Pacific Northwest ceramics. The opportunity had emerged through connections made during my Portland debut, demonstrating how authentic professional relationships could create expanding circles of opportunity for someone committed to excellence and integrity. The exhibition would feature entirely new work exploring themes of transformation and renewal that moved beyond my personal divorce story to examine universal experiences of growth and change. The Seattle gallery owner, Margaret Walsh, was a formidable woman in her 60s, who had spent decades identifying and promoting emerging artists throughout the region. Her decision to offer me a solo exhibition represented significant validation of my artistic development and commercial potential. The commitment required producing 25 new pieces that demonstrated both technical mastery and thematic coherence, challenging me to work at a scale and level of sophistication that would establish my credentials among serious collectors and art critics. Preparing for the solo exhibition required developing new glazing techniques and exploring forms that pushed beyond the functional pottery that had launched my career toward more sculptural expressions of my artistic vision. The pieces needed to work together as a cohesive collection while showcasing the range of my capabilities and the depth of my creative thinking. Each vessel became an exploration of specific themes related to transformation, resilience, and the beauty that could emerge from apparent destruction. The technical demands of creating exhibition-quality pieces, while fulfilling commission obligations, stretched my production capabilities and required more systematic approaches to studio management and time allocation. I established schedules that balanced creative exploration with practical deadlines, learning to manage multiple projects simultaneously without compromising the quality standards that had earned me recognition and respect. The discipline required was challenging but rewarding, confirming my capability to sustain a professional artistic practice at a level that could support my independence indefinitely. The community of artists and craftspeople I was becoming part of provided support and encouragement that differed fundamentally from the social relationships I had maintained during my marriage. These friendships were based on shared passion for creative expression rather than social obligation or professional networking. Conversations about technique, inspiration, and the challenges of building sustainable artistic careers energized, rather than drained me,
contributing to my work rather than competing with it for time and attention. Claire visited again in July, bringing her new boyfriend and obviously eager to show off her sister's transformation to someone important in her life. The change in our relationship since my divorce was remarkable, with our conversations now focused on my artistic development and professional success, rather than the careful avoidance of difficult topics that had characterized our interactions during my marriage. Her pride in my accomplishments was genuine and freely expressed, no longer tempered by concern about offending Marcus or triggering conflict within my household. The weekend they spent with me provided outside perspective on how dramatically my lifestyle and priorities had shifted since discovering Marcus's betrayal. Where I had once structured my time around his schedule and preferences, my days now revolved around studio work, exhibition preparation, and genuine friendships within the artistic community. The house that had once showcased Marcus's professional achievements now displayed my pottery and art books, reflecting authentic interests rather than carefully curated impressions designed to advance someone else's career. Claire's boyfriend, a documentary filmmaker named David, who specialized in profiles of creative entrepreneurs, was fascinated by my transformation story and the role that discovering authentic passion had played in rebuilding my life after betrayal. His questions about the relationship between personal crisis and creative breakthrough helped me articulate aspects of my experience that I hadn't fully processed, particularly the way that losing the identity I had built around my marriage had freed me to discover capabilities and interests I hadn't known existed. The conversation with David also highlighted how unusual my response to infidelity and abandonment had been compared to the typical patterns he had observed in his documentary work. Rather than seeking revenge or wallowing in victimhood, I had channeled the energy of betrayal into building something beautiful and sustainable that belonged entirely to me. The legal consequences Marcus faced were the natural result of his criminal behavior rather than vindictive actions on my part, while my artistic success represented authentic talent development rather than therapy disguised as creativity. As summer progressed toward fall and my Seattle exhibition approached, I reflected on the completeness of my transformation and the sustainability of the new life I had built. The woman who had discovered her husband's pregnant mistress making renovation plans in her inherited living room was preparing for a solo exhibition that would establish her credentials as a serious artist capable of commanding premium prices for work that reflected both technical mastery and authentic creative vision. The financial independence I had achieved through pottery sales and commissions eliminated any remaining vulnerability to financial manipulation or control by someone who confused generosity with weakness. The house that Marcus and Vanessa had tried to claim was now generating income through studio sales, while serving as peaceful sanctuary that reflected my authentic preferences, rather than uncomfortable compromises with someone else's demand. The artistic community I had discovered provided genuine friendship and professional support that had been absent from my marriage, where social relationships had been structured around Marcus's career advancement rather than mutual interests and authentic connection. These new friendships were based on shared passion for creative expression, rather than social obligation, contributing energy to my work rather than competing with it for attention and resources. The basement studio that had been my hidden refuge during the worst days of my marriage was now the proud center of a thriving artistic practice that commanded respect and premium prices from collectors who appreciated both technical skill and authentic expression. The kiln that Marcus had complained about was now fired regularly to create pieces that sold quickly and generated income that supported my complete independence from any external financial control or manipulation. The legal resolution of my divorce had established clear consequences for betrayal while protecting my assets and dignity from further attack, demonstrating that strategic patience and professional legal representation were more effective than emotional reactivity in achieving lasting justice. Marcus's criminal conviction and professional destruction served as deterrent to future partners who might consider targeting women for financial exploitation, while my successful transition to artistic independence provided a model for transforming crisis into opportunity. As August moved toward September and my Seattle exhibition opening approached, I felt profound satisfaction with the authentic life I had built through my own choices and creative vision. The shock of discovering my husband's pregnant mistress in my living room had ultimately led to discovering capabilities and interests that had been suppressed for years, freeing me to become the artist and woman I was always meant to be beneath the accommodating wife persona I had gradually developed to avoid conflict and maintain peace. The pottery that Marcus had dismissed as an expensive hobby was now supporting my complete financial independence while providing recognition and respect within Portland's competitive artistic community. The basement space he had wanted to convert for his convenience was now generating income through sales and commissions that exceeded what I had earned in corporate marketing. The house he had tried to claim was now serving as both sanctuary and successful studio for work that commanded premium prices and critical respect. The transformation story that began with betrayal and invasion had evolved into triumph and authentic self-expression that promised continued growth and development as I explored new artistic territories and deepened relationships within the creative community that had welcomed me as a respected colleague. The woman Marcus had underestimated and abandoned had emerged stronger, more talented, and infinitely more authentic than she had ever been while accommodating his expanding demands and disappearing respect. The future I was building belonged entirely to me, shaped by choices that reflected my genuine interests and values rather than strategic accommodation to someone else's expectations and professional needs. The Seattle exhibition would mark another milestone in my artistic development while opening new opportunities for growth and recognition that would have been impossible within the constraints of my marriage, where creativity had been treated as indulgence rather than valuable skill deserving respect and financial support. Looking ahead to the exhibition opening and beyond, I felt confident in my ability to continue building on the foundation of independence and authenticity I had fought so hard to establish and protect. The betrayal that had initially felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of discovering who I really was beneath years of careful compromise and gradual self-suppression, leading to a life more fulfilling and sustainable than anything I had imagined possible during my marriage. The woman who had been abandoned was now exactly where she belonged, surrounded by beauty she had created with her own hands and supported by relationships built on authentic connection rather than social convenience or professional advance. The transformation was complete, but the story was continuing as I prepared to explore new artistic challenges and build deeper connections within the creative community that valued genuine expression over surface accomplishments or social status. The September evening of my Seattle solo exhibition opening arrived with the crisp clarity that makes Pacific Northwest autumns feel like nature's own art gallery. Standing before the mirror in my hotel room, adjusting the emerald silk dress I had chosen specifically for this milestone, I marveled at the woman reflected back at me. The confident artist preparing for her career-defining moment bore little resemblance to the shocked wife who had discovered strangers claiming her living room just 1 year earlier. Margaret Walsh had transformed her gallery into a showcase that elevated my pottery beyond functional craft into the realm of serious contemporary art. Each of my 25 pieces was illuminated with museum-quality lighting that emphasized the subtle variations in glaze and form that distinguished handmade work from mass production. The collection told a complete story of transformation through clay, from the earliest pieces that captured raw emotion to the latest works that celebrated renewal and strength discovered through adversity. The opening drew an impressive crowd that included established collectors, art critics from regional publications, and fellow artists whose respect meant more to me than commercial success. The validation of my peers, people who understood the technical challenges and creative risks involved in developing a distinctive artistic voice, confirmed that my transition from abandoned wife to professional ceramicist was recognized and celebrated within the community I now called home. Sales exceeded even Margaret's optimistic projections, with 12 pieces selling during the first hour and advance orders placed for future work that would keep my studio busy through the following spring. The financial success was gratifying, but more meaningful was the sophisticated appreciation shown by collectors who understood both the technical mastery and emotional depth embedded in each vessel. These weren't sympathy purchases or charitable support for a woman rebuilding her life. They were serious investments in artwork that would appreciate and value while enhancing the daily lives of people who chose to live surrounded by authentic beauty. The evening's highlight came when Thomas Richardson, chief curator at the Seattle Art Museum, spent considerable time examining my work and discussing the themes I was exploring through ceramic form. His interest in potentially including one of my pieces in the museum's upcoming Pacific Northwest Contemporary Art exhibition represented recognition at a level I had never imagined possible during those dark months of legal battles and studio sessions fueled by anger and determination. As the evening wound down and the last visitors departed, Margaret and I sat in her office reviewing the overwhelming success of the opening while planning the trajectory of my artistic career. Her decades of experience guiding emerging artists had taught her to recognize not just talent, but the combination of technical skill, creative vision, and professional dedication required to sustain a career at the highest level. Her confidence in my potential was based on concrete evidence rather than encouraging optimism, making her guidance invaluable for navigating the complex business aspects of serious artistic practice. The drive back to Portland the following morning gave me time to process the magnitude of what I had accomplished and the path that stretched ahead. The woman who had been systematically diminished during her marriage had not only recovered her authentic self but had discovered capabilities that exceeded anything she had previously imagined possible. The pottery studio that Marcus had dismissed as an expensive hobby was now the foundation of a career that promised both financial security and profound personal fulfillment. Returning to my reclaimed house, I walked through each room appreciating the peaceful sanctuary I had created through my own vision and labor. The master bedroom reflected my personal aesthetic rather than compromises with someone else's preference. The kitchen was organized for my cooking style and entertaining needs, rather than accommodating a pregnant stranger's dietary restrictions. Most importantly, the basement studio was fully equipped and productive, generating income and recognition that supported my complete independence. The legal aftermath of my divorce had concluded with outcomes that exceeded my most optimistic expectations, while establishing clear consequences for betrayal and criminal behavior. Marcus's conviction for client fund embezzlement had resulted in 18 months in minimum security prison, permanent loss of his architectural license, and restitution obligations that would follow him for years. The man who had abandoned me as a cruel joke was now discovering the lasting consequences of treating other people as disposable obstacles to his personal gratification. Vanessa's situation had deteriorated even further following Marcus's incarceration, with her minimum wage employment proving insufficient to support herself and their infant daughter while maintaining the lifestyle she had expected when targeting a married architect for financial security. Her mother's resources were limited, and the extended family that had initially supported her relationship with a successful professional became less enthusiastic about providing ongoing assistance to a single mother whose partner was serving time for theft. The contrast between their circumstances and my flourishing independence provided perspective on the different paths available to people facing major life disruption. Where they had chosen deception, entitlement, and manipulation as strategies for achieving their goals, I had responded with legal precision, authentic creative development, and building genuine relationships within a community that valued integrity and excellence. The dramatically different outcomes reflected the fundamental differences in our approaches to crisis and opportunity. Winter brought news that validated my artistic trajectory beyond anything I had dared hope for during those early months of pottery classes and basement studio sessions. The Seattle Art Museum had indeed selected one of my pieces for their Pacific Northwest Contemporary exhibition, providing exposure to national collectors and critics who could elevate my career to levels previously reserved for artists with decades of experience and development. More significantly, a documentary filmmaker who had covered my exhibition for a public television arts program wanted to feature my transformation story as part of a series about creative entrepreneurs who had built successful businesses from personal passion. The project would provide national exposure while demonstrating how authentic artistic development could serve as both personal healing and professional foundation for people willing to commit fully to their creative vision. Spring arrived with a commission that represented the ultimate validation of my artistic development and professional reputation. The Four Seasons Hotel in downtown Seattle wanted to feature my work throughout their renovated restaurant and bar spaces, with pieces that would serve both functional and aesthetic purposes, while reflecting the Pacific Northwest's distinctive cultural character. The project would involve creating over 100 pieces in coordinated collections that maintained my artistic integrity, while meeting the practical demands of high-volume commercial use. The technical and creative challenges of the Four Seasons Commission pushed my capabilities to new levels while providing financial compensation that secured my independence indefinitely. Working with their design team required collaborative skills I had developed during my marketing career but applied now to my own artistic vision rather than someone else's commercial goal. The result was pottery that enhanced the dining experience while showcasing the handmade character that distinguished my work from mass-produced alternatives. As the first anniversary of discovering Marcus and Vanessa in my living room approached, I reflected on the completeness of my transformation and the authentic life I had built through strategic thinking, creative dedication, and refusal to accept victim status as permanent identity. The shock that had initially felt like total destruction had actually been liberation from constraints I hadn't recognized were limiting my potential and authentic self-expression. The pottery pieces filling my reclaimed house represented not just artistic accomplishment, but evidence of my capability to transform raw materials into valuable beauty through skill, patience, and creative vision. Each bowl, vase, and sculpture told part of the story of rising from betrayal and abandonment to independence and recognition, demonstrating that crisis could become foundation for growth that exceeded previous limitations and expectations. The artistic community I had discovered provided friendship and professional support that enriched my daily life while contributing to my creative development rather than competing with it for time and attention. These relationships were based on shared passion for authentic expression rather than social obligation or professional networking, creating a support system that sustained rather than drained my energy and enthusiasm. The basement studio that had been my hidden refuge was now the proud center of a thriving practice that commanded respect throughout the Pacific Northwest arts community while generating income that supported complete financial autonomy. The kiln that Marcus had complained about was now fired regularly to create pieces that sold quickly to collectors who appreciated both technical mastery and the authentic story embedded in each vessel. Looking ahead, the future held possibilities that would have been unimaginable during my marriage, when my time and energy had been structured around supporting someone else's career rather than developing my own capabilities and interests. The upcoming museum exhibition would provide exposure to national collectors and critics who could elevate my work to even higher levels of recognition and compensation. Most importantly, the woman I had become through this journey was stronger, more authentic, and infinitely more capable than the person who had gradually diminished herself to avoid conflict and maintain superficial peace. The shock of discovering my husband's pregnant mistress making renovation plans in my inherited living room had ultimately led to discovering who I really was beneath years of accommodation and compromise. The transformation story that began with betrayal and invasion had evolved into triumph, authentic success that promised continued growth and development as I explored new artistic territories while building deeper relationships within the creative community that valued genuine expression over surface accomplishment. The pottery that Marcus had dismissed was now supporting my independence, while the house he had tried to claim was serving as both sanctuary and productive studio for work that commanded premium prices. The legal consequences he faced were the natural result of his criminal choices, rather than vindictive actions on my part, while my artistic success represented authentic talent development rather than therapy disguised as creativity. The woman he had underestimated and abandoned had emerged victorious not through revenge but through transformation, demonstrating that betrayal could become the foundation for building something more beautiful and sustainable than what had been destroyed. As spring moved toward summer and new opportunities continued emerging from the foundation of independence and authenticity I had established, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me to this moment of complete autonomy and creative fulfillment. The shock that had initially shattered my understanding of my life and marriage had ultimately freed me to discover capabilities and interests that had been suppressed for years. The woman who had been abandoned was now exactly where she belonged, surrounded by beauty she had created with her own hands and supported by relationships built on authentic connection rather than social convenience. The transformation was complete, and the story was continuing as I prepared to explore new artistic challenges while maintaining the independence and integrity that had emerged from crisis transformed into opportunity. The betrayal that had felt like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of discovering my authentic self, leading to a life more fulfilling and sustainable than anything I had imagined possible during my marriage. Sometimes the cruelest actions yield the greatest gifts, and trying to break me had accidentally set me free to become the artist and woman I was always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.